The revolution is here. A movement of people free to live, work, and choose. We won't tell you what to think. We just demand that you think for yourself. This is Kibbe on Liberty. So we were. This is part 2 of the crypto anarchy megathon, whatever that is.
Yeah, megathon.
It's a megathon, and we were talking a lot about cryptocurrency, primarily blockchain under the assumption, but I wanted to dig a little bit deeper and sort of speculate, because this is what we did when we were hanging out in Guatemala. Because smart people in this space have very strong and differing opinions about whether or not there is an opportunity to blockchain everything. And by everything, I don't mean everything. I mean specifically all of the things that we used to be so optimistic about. We talked about Wikipedia, we talked about Facebook, we talked about Twitter, and I was one of those romantics that thought that these things would so radically transform the world, democratize, push power back down to the end user, all that stuff. And lo and behold, we discovered that the people that held the keys to the kingdom, maybe it's Jack,
right?
Maybe it's Mark Zuckerberg, who I still to this day believe is probably a lizard alien. These guys control it, and ultimately part of their control is kowtowing to the advertisers and the corporate interests that really make up the majority of their revenue flow. So all of a sudden, we're back where we started, where information is constricted and there's no liberty in those platforms. So how do we fix that? Is blockchain a solution?
Yes, so you mentioned how they fight these things, and living through the 90s as a open source freedom fighter, back in the day, we fought Microsoft. Basically, Microsoft was the big bad bully. That was the enemy number one back then. Like now it's Facebook and Twitter and these guys that control the communications. But back then it was like the operating system wars of Linux, the open source darling of the internet, that was powered by people connected all over the world, all contributing to this. If you get a chance, go look up the Super Bowl commercial for Linux back in like 2000 or 1999. It's really cool. It's a really inspiring video. We'll link that in the comments, as they say on all this.
This is not. I know this is not the one where they throw the hammer in the.
That was Apple. That was Apple in like '84. That was way back. No, this is one where it's a really cool video. It's worth watching. But anyway, what we did was we fought what was called fear, uncertainty, and doubt (FUD), and it's a common tactic. It's kind of a lazy tactic, but it's effective at slowing down the competition. Like the people who really understand how these things work. I mean, we're talking about like the eggheads at the Fed, the eggheads on Wall Street, the Bank of England. All these different, the writing's on the wall. Like they've lost. This war has already been won. I mean, we know that. And now it's just a matter of like saving face and like how do we slow this thing down so we can have an exit strategy, or how do we stretch this? The Gittins been getting, or the Gittings have been pretty good for the last 70 years or so for these people. So like if they can just stretch this out another 5 years into last year's their twilight years, it'd be great. But we know how these things we know how to fight these wars. You just keep your head down and you keep building. You keep developing, you keep building, you keep stay on message, and I think that's where we're going. So like I said, the war has already been won. We're just letting it play out now. We're just cat's out of the bag.
Well, it's fascinating. So my whole theory about this, and I refuse to give up my optimism that I had 10 years ago when I was talking about this romantic age where knowledge was completely democratized and the emperor would be permanently stripped of their clothes, and then we had the backlash where they're playing a game of whack-a-mole where they want to stop us no matter what, and their tactics get more vitriolic and more desperate as we go along. And in the process, we're in this, like, we call it the culture war, but it's like we're discovering that we're not all the same, and some of us want to live life differently than other people. But I feel like we're in the middle of a paradigm shift away from top-down structures that used to tell us what to do, what to think, how to act, to a radically democratized world where nobody gets to tell anybody else what to do.
Yeah.
And we don't actually quite understand the institutions that hold that world together yet. And so I lean on Hayek, as I always do. Here's Hayek, drinking. Because, of course, Hayek talked about the way that institutions evolve naturally just by people going through the process trying to figure out what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so like it wasn't a government saying you can't kill people, you can't drive on the left side of the road, or depending on which country you're in, the other side. It was people just practically realizing, you know what, if we establish these rules and we start following these rules, we're going to get to a place where fewer people hurt people or take their stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
that wasn't a question. I don't know.
There was a lot there. No, but I picked some things out. There was a good talking point. So if you go back, man, I really like making these analogies. I think taking people back to like, talking about the internet and Web 2.0, because we just lived through it. It's the most, probably the biggest part of our lives these days, social media, and then how we distribute media, how we communicate. If you go back, now that the dust has settled, and we look back at this internet thing, right? And we ask, what was the, 30 years later, like, what was it really? What was the internet? What did it actually do, right? It wasn't, oh, I can like do online banking and I can order like crap off of Amazon and have it shipped next day. What did it solve? It solved the communications problem. That's what the internet did. It solved the communications problem. That was the fundamental piece. Everything else on top of it is kind of like, shades of gray after that. But it's like the internet solved the communications problem. So if here we are like I said, in the first or second inning of the blockchain of Bitcoin or whatever you want to call it, looking 20 years into the future in retrospect. So going forward to go backwards, what did blockchain solve? It solved the trust issue. And trust is a really, really big piece here, because right now the problem is we cannot trust Facebook. We can communicate all day long. I mean, I can set up a signal group and put a bunch of my friends in there. We can talk about whatever we want, right? But the thing is that Facebook has co-opted the user experience. They've got the critical mass. They've got everybody there. It's the feeding trough. And then once you have that, it's really hard. These network effects are really hard to dismantle. But if you look at the fundamental problem with Facebook, it's that there's a trust issue. We're trusting them. We put our trust into Twitter. We put our trust into these social networks, these centralized networks. So if you look at blockchain, you go 20 years in the future and look back, you're going to realize that blockchain solved the trust issue. There's no longer this ability to edit things or take things down or like DMCA things. Like all these are, even in my company, we talk about, people ask us, investors and lawyers usually ask us about intellectual property. Like, well, are you going to patent that? And I was like, it's open source, bro. And they're like, yeah, but like, you got to protect yourself. I'm like, no, if you're fully into blockchain like I am, you live in a post-IP world. I mean, there's like these massive paradigm shifts. I mean, like there's these thought exercises, and geez, I mean, I hate to say thought crimes, but like, you start realizing that like a government is just an organization like any other. It's just an organization of people. And then there's the quippy quote about, but they have a monopoly on violence. Mm-hmm. There's that piece. But really, you start looking at things much differently. And like, so in our vernacular, we don't say dollars anymore. We say government tokens. They're just government tokens. Or like, we don't say text messaging. We say NSA chat app. And it's like, once you start to reframe those things in your mind, it like, the world starts to look really different. I mean, really different. I mean, like these lines that are drawn on maps start to become like, what is that? I mean, what if I subscribe to a digital government or an ethereal government that exists only on a blockchain through something called a DAO, which is a really, really cool, complex area
I'm
of
feeling
research.
like Neo right now.
Yeah.
Like,
but this is the way out of the system. Like, I was just mentioning DAOs, like decentralized autonomous organization. Whoa. Okay. Those three words when put together, decentralized, love it. Autonomous. Okay. What does that mean exactly? Like, how does that work? Organization, that's something that speaks to me, those three words. When you realize how these DAOs are being put together and what they can do, mean, you've got DAOs running around right now in these organizations, these factions, I mean, you're really testing Westphalian theory because, like, you know, what is your number one as a Texan? You know, my dad raised me saying, you know, be a Texan first, American second. That's how Texans think. We're Texan first, American. So, you know, how do you square that circle with who do you have allegiance to? Is it the people that are like-minded? The guy from Japan and the guy from Germany and the guy from South Africa and the guy from Belize? Like, is that your tribe, or is it the people on your block? Well, it depends on where you're at. It depends on where you exist. And then you see 12-year-old kids sitting there with an iPad. Dude, they live in a metaverse. That's where the new term's coming up. I mean, it's still being defined, and it's this kind of amorphous, you know, layer. Call it bullshit, call it the future, whatever. But it's man, you're like really having to rethink all of these things. I mean, you're really having to rethink this stuff. And now that you're like, you know, your assets, your money, your wealth, or your whatever is now being digitized out of the reach of government. I mean, how do you even begin? Like, you got to ask all these fundamental questions. So you've got to go back, bring this back into the economics piece. You have to go all the way back to the 1500s, to the Enlightenment, and figure out, what were those guys reading? Like, what were those guys saying? The rights of man. I mean, like the Constitution. You've got to go back to all these seminal works and tease them out in a modern day setting, and then you can implement them. You can actually create the substrate. You can create the frameworks that override. You know what the guys, you know, 2 blocks from here end up saying.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, dude. I mean, we're in a really badass time in history where it's like, man, the geeks have the power, and like, it's time to party. Yeah. I love it.
So I feel obligated at this point to quote a Scottish Enlightenment philosopher, since you're hearkening back to those days, because I always fall back on, like, when everything looks completely fucked up,
mm-hmm.
and the government's like encroaching on all of our rights, and people are pushing against that. I always quote Adam Ferguson,
mm-hmm.
who talked about the wisdom of crowds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and it's a fancy way of saying, you know what, people are going to hack the system, and we're going to figure it out. Yeah, and it's all going to be cool.
Well, there's a lot of there's 2 types of people in the world. There's a lot of different people in the world, but there's 2 groups that you have people who thrive in stable environments, stable markets, and they love stability. They go to work every day. When everything's honky dory, they're in love. I go to sleep. I'm bored. I'm like, we need something's got to move. We got to have some shake up in the system. Well, when things start to shake up, when you have this new, like, you know, I was falling asleep in the late 2000s, early teens. There wasn't much going on. Like, there wasn't much more innovation to happen. We got to the very end of the web. You know, it was like, okay, like, we're gonna rebrand Facebook, or we're gonna like add a new widget, or like, but we'd already solved all the problems. So the amount of the S curve of development, when you get to the top there, things start to, you know, what's the material difference between the iPhone 12 and 13? Not much. Technology follows that same. Every piece of technology, like, the differences aren't there. But if you go back to, you know, iPhone 1 to iPhone 2, massive change, like massive advancements, and then it sort of teeters off. And so we're now in this new area where it's, you know, we've got this abstraction, we have all this disruption going on, this ability, this like really, really powerful technology that's allowing for all this stuff to happen.
So taking a step back, because I was really fascinated by a conversation that Tim Pool was having with the CEO of Rumble, mm-hmm. which happens to have been a Canadian company. I think they moved to Florida, the free state of Florida. If, like, you can't move to Texas, you move to Florida. Yeah. But, you know, Tim Pool is keenly aware that his entire business model is dependent
on YouTube or
on YouTube,
Spotify, or whatever.
Yeah. Fill in the blank, and, mm-hmm. and we've now seen, like, you know, how the mob goes after Spotify, like they did with Joe Rogan, and you know, the CEO of Rumble is promising, like, this is my project. I am not going to abandon the mission of free speech. And Tim's like, but you're gonna, if this gets as big as you say it's going to get, you're going to sell, and you're going to develop these relationships with corporations and
advertisers.
And by the way, one of the key advertisers happens to be the government. The government floods a lot of money in the system. Yeah. And Tim Pool's like, this is not a solution, yeah. even though
You're helping.
Right now, it looks like a super friendly place, but I remember when YouTube was a friendly free speech place.
Yeah. When Google was "Don't be evil."
Yeah. So it has to be something transformative. We'd have to get you on Tim Pool to assuage him of his fears, because I don't believe that the solution is a more friendly top-down system, and we're seeing all these things pop up where
because then you get,
I'm not going to censor you, but I'm still in charge.
Right. Well, you get Fox News.
Yeah.
You get the other side that just does the same damn thing, and so it's a tricky battle mentally, right? Because you have your own allegiances, you have your own beliefs, and we went through a whole summer of love 2 years ago where we had riots everywhere, and we had all this stuff going on, and it made me think about the truckers, right? So I'm like sitting here going, should people be able to fund the BLM riots? Oh man, that's a tough, like, I don't particularly identify with the BLM movement. I mean, there's parts of it that I agree with, but and then I look at the truckers and I'm like, it's really difficult. It makes you think about these things, and it tests you to make sure you're hardened to make those decisions. Like, we just go to Rumble. Well, then Rumble's silencing the people who are two in the middle. They haven't passed the sniff test, so they aren't going to get access to our viewership.
Yeah,
that's a really difficult piece there. And if you're a purist, if you really believe in what you're saying, you got to have a common. I think everybody should have a voice. Everybody.
Yeah. And
that's the whole thing about I may not agree with what you say, but I fight like hell to make sure you have the ability to say it or whatever, in some terms. That's a really important piece there. So where do you land? This technology, blockchain, and these decentralized technologies are going to bring that in.
Yeah.
It's still 1993, and you're asking me if we can watch movies in the car. We're not there yet. It'll come, but just like there's a lot of work that has to be done on the technical side before we get to like the higher levels of this stuff.
But see, I'm an absolutist on these things. I would call myself a radical Democrat. Mm-hmm. I actually believe that everyone should have a voice. Mm-hmm. I absolutely don't believe that 50+1% of the people that happen to show up in an election get to dictate the lives of everybody else. Mm-hmm. But to me, that's not democracy. That's tyranny. That's
mob rule. Yeah.
Yeah, it's mob rule. It's something bad.
Yeah.
And I'm also a free speech absolutist, which gets back to this question of a new set of institutions and rules, if you will.
Yeah.
That will govern this radically democratized society. We don't know how exactly that's going to work. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to figure it out together. But I think that those of us that believe in liberty and personal responsibility and the rights of people to do what they want as long as they don't hurt people or take their stuff.
Right.
This is our world. Like mm-hmm. we should not be afraid of this.
Right.
Because we know from human history that people have a way of figuring things out and establishing rules. This is where the whole classical liberal mm-hmm. Framework came from.
Yeah.
It wasn't planned.
Right.
It wasn't dictated. A king didn't do this. A benevolent dictator didn't do it. Just folks did it.
Yeah.
And so like we should be like embracing this movement. Like this is our moment to shine.
So if you go back and you look at how the Americans fought the redcoats, the British, right? The British wanted to line up in these straight lines. They wanted to. I mean, this is common knowledge. I mean, this is sort of American history 101. But what did we do? Right? We decided, no, we're gonna hit them at night. We're gonna hit them from the trees. We're gonna jump out. We're gonna ambush them. Right? We're not gonna line up in a field with their nice weapons. We're gonna use our muskets that haven't been used in 2 years or rusty, and we don't know how to. We don't have uniforms, right? We don't know what the hell we're doing. We're fighting for freedom here. So what do we had to do? We had to get crafty. Well, the same thing can be said today, right? So there was this whole thing about where the Americans, like when word got back to England and the king or queen, I don't remember which one it was. I'm a couple of Zaccapas in, but they were, they said, wait, they want to do what? They want to govern themselves?
It was George,
what?
Right? King George?
Yeah, King George. Yeah. And he was like,
Brad, fact check this.
Like, they want to do what? They want to govern themselves? Like, what kind of crazy idea is that? Fast forward to 2011, and all of a sudden the Fed gets this thing that says they figured out a way to make their own money. They want to control their own money? Well, that's preposterous. How could we ever let that happen? right? It's this dude. Like, there's so many parallels.
Yeah. Speaking of Queens, like, the moment that I knew we were on the right track was the day that Hillary Clinton tweeted out something that was so hostile to cryptocurrency that I said, okay, this is the path forward.
Yeah.
That's all I need to know. I don't know anything, but this is the path forward.
There's a saying in the crypto community that if the U.S. bans it, buy it. If China bans it, buy more.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it goes the same way. It's like, oh, really? You don't like that? I mean, God, is there anything more American than like, oh, your government doesn't like it, do it more? I mean, a red-blooded American. I mean, not someone who cowers and like, govern me more, daddy. I mean, I'm talking about, that kind of thing. It's like...
So, practical questions, and maybe you're working on these things, maybe you're not, and maybe you don't want to talk about what you are working on, but the practical questions for people that hate the fact that Twitter can cancel you. But Twitter's a really important thing. And going back to an earlier point, like, I don't want to go down a ghetto where I only get to speak to this tribe or that tribe. And that's
echo chamber, yeah.
That's where we're headed right now. Like, you kind of have to be woke to be allowed to speak your mind on YouTube now. Or you could go to Rumble and you could be not woke.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't want to divide us that way, because I don't think that most people are either of those things. They were just like trying to figure stuff out.
We should find some sort of middle ground where we can all talk and like we can all be influenced by their ideas. I mean, free speech is a human right.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is.
So it just so happens, like, you look at Dave Chappelle or Joe Rogan and maybe a handful of other sort of guys that just so command a massive audience that they're effectively uncancelable. Because if Spotify unplugs Joe Rogan, they probably kill themselves in the same process.
Yeah.
But the rest of us, I'm not Joe Rogan. I'm not Dave Chappelle.
Under the radar.
They can unplug me tomorrow.
Yeah.
So the question is, like, how do the rest of us get to that space where we can talk to all the audiences, we can say what's on our minds, we can make mistakes, we can potentially say things that offend people. Is blockchain going to solve that problem?
In the long run, yeah, we're still years away from that. That's not like in 6 months there's a new. I mean, there's going to be a lot of people who try to build that platform on blockchain. It's going to be too early. We're still, when I say years, I mean more than one. Could be 2, could be 5, could be. I would be surprised if it's further out than 5. This technology is moving really, really fast. There's a lot of. Right now, we're just trying to get the nuts and bolts together, like with the infrastructure, like trying to build these things and build it for scale. Then we'll worry about getting on the next billion users out there. There's a lot of work, a lot of engineering, hardcore engineering work to be done. I mean, what Bitcoin gave us 12 years ago is a good start. I mean, it was the precipice, but we've got a long way to go on the technology side. But it's happening very fast. That's the fun part. So in crypto, like, we talk about something like back in September, like that's like 4 years ago in crypto time. Like September was like, I mean, I can't even remember back then. Things have changed so much. Everything, you go back to this interview right here or this conversation in like 3 months from now, and I'll be like, I was so off base. I had no idea what I was talking about. Everything's changed. Like I don't stand by any of that. I mean, things just move so quickly.
We'll put a warning at the bottom of the episode.
Yeah, put like the date. Like, yeah.
So I'm thinking about peaceful protests, and I want to go back to the Canadian truckers and sort of wrap up in there. But back in the day, and infamously, the head of the FBI was Hoover, the head of the FBI. Help me.
Who?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And there was this clandestine effort to go after MLK for being the. Allegedly, although it's more complicated than that, but he was the titular head of the civil rights movement, and the government wanted to shut him down. So they specifically targeted him, and actually, they recorded him and tried to get him to commit suicide, because they figured if they could cut off the head of the movement, they could destroy that. Justin Trudeau is trying to do the same thing to the Canadian truckers, and we've mentioned this, but we haven't really gone through the pecking order in the way that he went after GoFundMe first, Well, actually, I guess they were GoFundMe was badgered into submission, perhaps.
By the mob, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, maybe, or maybe they wanted to do it anyway.
Right.
But either way, they're like completely destroying their own business model by saying, you know what, we just took all these donations, but we're not going to give them to the purpose you thought.
They reappropriated. They didn't give it back. They said, we're going to give them to some, like, Truckers for Food or something like that. Yeah.
And then people were eventually so pissed off, and they realized, oh, this destroys our business model. As I understand it, they've now committed to give the money back to the people that gave it, but they would never give it to the truckers themselves. And then there was this alternative crowdsourced thing, which I now forget the name of again. GoFund or...
No, there's no go. It's fund.
It's Give, Send Go.
Give, Send, Go.
So Give, Send, Go emerges as an alternative, and the head of Give, Send, Go, as I understand it, was a good guy. He was going to promote this, but then it got hacked because it's still like a centralized system.
Yep.
And then not only got hacked, but the donors that gave to Give, Send, Go to the now notorious and evil Canadian truckers were outed in the press. I was reading an article in the New York Times that was published 21 hours ago where they're doxing the people that had the audacity to give to the truckers.
All the news that's fit for print.
Yeah. So the short term, like, this is a problem today, and it looks like potentially the short-term solution is in fact going to be Bitcoin.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Like, we have a giant exit sign over that, over the systems they're all the hurdles they're putting in front of us, you know, and we have this giant exit sign. We just need to wake up and be brave, go out there and figure out how to use it. It's early technology. It's dangerous. There's a lot of things, a lot of terms you won't recognize as a new user, but man, you got to learn. Like, this is where things are moving, and you know, folks like the truckers, like anybody, any group of people that want to have, you know, grassroots, you know, protests and stuff like this, you know, or just any sort of transaction, you know, the right to commerce, the right to support things, to move the pieces on the board. Like, I mean, that's a human right, isn't it? And for the government to come, for these all governments to be able to get in there and meddle in these things is like, dude, what are you doing? We got to figure out a way around, a sly roundabout way to get around this system, and we have it. And
that was a Hayek quote, so we got to drink.
Yeah, and there you go.
Cheers. But I think, like, this could be the catalyst. Like, there's moments.
If it's not, there's going to be another one in 6 months or 3 months. Because the government's constantly. If there's one thing we can depend on, is that the government's going to overstep their bounds every 6 months. You know, and we're gonna. And it's a matter. It's that tipping point. Like, where's that hockey stick point?
Yeah.
Where does it? Is it easy enough? And the need is there. Once you cross that, you're done. Because now
I just rewatched the Matrix trilogy, so I'm now obsessed with the metaphor of being red-pilled, and not in the political sense, but in the sense that
when you're black-pilled, that's where it gets really bad.
So I don't even know what that means. Like,
you go look up, like, black pilling, and that's where you get.
There's white pilling, there's black pilling.
Yeah, black pilling gets real dark, real deep.
Okay.
Like, you just lose faith in humanity.
He doesn't mean that, please.
Yeah. But see, I was trying to end this whole freaking thing on an optimistic note.
Yeah.
Like,
well, hey, look, money's getting to the truckers. They're going to figure out a way to get it done. We got enough tools out there. There's a lot of smart people out there that are supporting those guys and girls to on that mission. And there's enough technological and sort of what we call normie ways of getting things. You know, it's great you have a lot of Bitcoin, but I'm hungry. How do you get food? Well, there's ways to do that. And there's whole systems that are set up, and there's good people out there working towards these things. I just hope that those good people work on all you know, situations, whether they agree with it or not. I think that's the point here. That's what's beautiful about liberty, is that everybody gets it.
That's the project.
Yeah.
And I'm out of whiskey, so we got to end.
Whiskey.
It's not even whiskey. This is rum. Forget it.
All right, buddy.
Yeah. See.
Thanks for having me on.
Can we edit that in post? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that show, make sure that you like and subscribe. Click the little bell so that you get notifications. And if you consume this via podcast, go wherever you want to go. We're everywhere. Kibbe on Liberty. The revolution starts now.